Now starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jay Parsons. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this evening's webinar titled Ram Breeding Soundness with Dr. Cleon Kimberling and Jerry Parsons presenting. Dr. Kimberling and Jerry have literally tested tens of thousands of rams over the years and done that everything from one ram flocks to flocks with several hundred head of rams. So I'm really glad that I finally got them talked into presenting this webinar to the audience this evening, so we're in for a treat. I'd like to start by thanking the American Sheep Industry Association for providing funding for this program through the Let's Grow Committee, and invite all of our audience to visit the ASI website to learn more about the sheep industry and how to be successful in the sheep business. That URL is www.sheepusa.org. You can access the Let's Grow program materials by clicking the Rebuild link under Programs on the main menu. You can also access it by typing in the URL www.growourflock.org and go directly to their web pages. I'd like to remind our listeners that this webinar is being recorded. All webinar registrants will receive a follow-up email within the next 48 hours with a direct link to the webinar recording, as well as a link to access the webinar slides. Links to these materials, as well as recordings and slides from all of our past webinars, are also posted on the Let's Grow website, along with a lot of other great learning resources. So please go there and visit and learn a lot about the sheep industry. We're slated for a 45-minute presentation, followed by 20 to 25 minutes of questions. Feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentation or after it during the Q&A session. You can do that by typing them into the question box on the lower part of your control panel, which should be over on the right-hand side of your screen. You can also ask questions during the Q&A session. If you have a microphone attached, you can raise your hand and I can call on you and you can talk directly to our speakers. I will go over that again when we start the Q&A session. I'll be monitoring those questions throughout the presentation, but we'll wait until the Q&A session to handle them all. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our two speakers. Said a few things about their vast experience in testing rams, but let me tell you a little bit more about Dr. Cleon Kimberling, because he's a well-known figure in the American sheep industry. He worked for Colorado State University for 40 years, where he exemplified what it meant to be a land-grant university veterinarian. He had a ton of accomplishments, but I'll just highlight a few that are relevant to tonight's topic, including his extensive work on reproductive issues in sheep that led to the setting of the criteria, or the current criteria, for ram breeding soundness evaluations with the Society of Therogenealogy. Dr. Kimberling was instrumental in the development of several testing procedures for brucellus also, including the standard technique for Brucella ovis ELISA test in sheep. He was one of the first to correlate white blood cells in a semen sample with a ram having a high chance of culturing positive for B. ovis. He worked with Lane Manufacturing to help develop a handheld battery-operated ejaculator for rams that is now the industry standard. Dr. K has been named Veterinarian of the Year by the American Association of Small Ruminant Practitioners. He's also received the ASI Silver Ram Award for outstanding service to the sheep industry, and I had the pleasure of watching him be inducted into the Colorado Agriculture Hall of Fame just a few years ago. He's now retired from CSU, but he also continues to serve the industry in an active role as a consulting veterinarian for Optimal Livestock Services. Jerry Parsons is a certified veterinary technician and co-owner of Optimal Livestock Services, which specializes in sheep health and reproduction and management issues. Her previous experience includes 20 years at Colorado State University working with the Food Animal Medicine Integrated Livestock Management Program and the Cooperative Extension Service Program serving the sheep industry. She's co-author or author of several publications, including being the co-author of the book Raising Healthy Sheep and the lead author on the American Lamb Board Best Management Practices fact sheets for testing rams for breeding soundness. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to our speakers to go ahead and get started. I think, Cleon, you're up first, and I'll be back for the Q&A session, and hope you guys enjoy the presentation.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jay. and just a little bit of history of where we've come to in the breeding soundness examination or evaluation of rams. This started back with me anyway, back in 1959 when we first started working on rams epididymitis. And so since then, we've done a lot of work on developing the tests for it. When we first started, the only thing we had was a microscope and the ability to culture the semen sample. So a couple of things on that. We had one producer on the West Slope that had trouble with having ewes pregnant early on in the first cycle. And so we checked all of his rams, removed all of we had to do semen culture on all of those. We removed the infected ones, and the next year he had 90% of those ewes lambed in the first heat cycle. So you can take the pencil to that, and there'll be some slides on it about that 16, 18 days there, the amount of profit that or income you'll receive by having those in the first heat cycle. Another one that comes to mind is one producer that we tested these rams, and we eliminated about 50% of those rams, and he was complaining about, well, he didn't have enough ram power for his ewes. And my comment was to that is, we've eliminated the interference. You have more ram power now than if you'd have left those rams in there. And we all know what a dominant ram will do in a group of rams. That if that dominant ram is not highly fertile, they may have to breed in the next 1 or 2 heat cycles. So you put a pencil to that and see what it costs you to have that kind of spread out lambing. So those are some of the things that we've worked on. We worked on some others that one of our producers had raised their own rams for replacement, and he had a higher standard for his rams than we did. If he had any yearling rams that didn't measure at least 38 centimeters, he culled them. And he has one of the best twinning rates that I know of in the industry. So large scrotal circumference and healthy breeding rams has a lot to do with your twinning. So we'll get started with the presentation, and you'll see some of this as we go through the slides. So why do we do breeding soundness to start with? Well, you have good solid rams and you can utilize them to full extent. And we've done some studies on this. We'll show them in some of the later slides about utilizing rams to their maximum. And the main thing here again is it increases twinnings, the rams with large scrotal circumference and healthy, strong rams. You have more twins. And the thing that really is important, I think, is that shorten down that lambing period. We had one producer that was having lambs all the way up to the summer mountain ranges. So we tightened that lambing period down, because if you have lambs strung out for 2 or 3 cycles, it just wears your labor force out, wears you out too. So make sure that you have good, solid, healthy, strong rams with good semen quality and a good scrotal circumference. Next slide. And it depends on what your goals are in your sheep production, but the ram contributes over 80% of the genetic change in a flock. A lot of these traits are highly heritable. Scrotal circumference, 35 centimeters. 120-day weight, you can look at all those. If you're looking for wool characteristics, why you can change those when you select your rams. Next. Now we talk about breeding soundness examinations, and this is not just the semen quality, but the total physical examination. And we emphasize that on the reproductive tract is part of it. So rams' potential ability to impregnate a given number of ewes in a defined period of time. So that's what it amounts to. It's not a fertility check. We'll go into how we classify these. I think Jerry will pick up on that in some later slides. Next. And it's good to take a look at your rams out in a natural state, because they'll see how they perform. If they've got ones in there that are what we call buddy groups that have no interest in ewes whatsoever, why this is a good place to pick those out and get rid of them before the breeding season ever starts, because there's studies done at Du Bois, the sheep experimental station, that say that 10 to 15% of all rams do not have any interest in ewes. So you can spot those when you're out there when they're not stirred up, when they're in their normal environment. You can spot which ones are this group of buddies and get rid of them. And body condition, you see here the rams in the hillside here. Keep these rams good shape all year round. Don't pull them in just 30 days before the breeding season. Load them up on corn trying to get them up into shape. This is just like a fine-tuned athlete. They've got work to do. They've got to be ready to go. They've got to be in good body condition way before you start on the breeding season. So get them in shape long ways prior to the breeding season. And in the left here, you can see a body condition 1 to 5 or 0 to 5. And you don't want either one of those. You want them in there to 3 to 4s. And if they're in the wool, you've got to put your hands on. You can't tell with a long staple length of wool what their body condition is. It masks the condition they're in. And the social behavior, that's what we talked about, the buddy groups. Okay? And identification of each individual ram is a must, because if you're going to measure anything, you need to be able to identify them. And especially, they're really important if you're doing any blood work to check for Brucella ovis or ovine percussive pneumonia. You need a good identification scheme. I love the radio frequency ID ear tags, and the scrapey ones work for that, so that you can do those and not be writing down numbers. You just do a barcode printout. Okay?
On the identification, also, when you're handwriting numbers, there's always a 10 to 12% rate of error, especially when you start moving into numbers that are 4 or 5 and 6 digits long when you're handwriting versus using the electronic ID systems.
That's
so when
true. Go ahead, Judy.
So when we start our physical exam, we want to look at the overall general health condition of the ram. We want to make sure that they're bright and alert, free of nasal and eye discharge, that there's no external parasites or fungus on them. You also want to check the mouth and the mucous membranes. They should be slightly moist and pink. This is a pretty good picture of what they should look like. If a ram's mucous membranes are pale, it may indicate an internal parasitism problem. And over here on the left in the small picture there, it shows the barber pole worm or Haemonchus contortus as parasites in the ram. When you see that they do have pale mucous membranes, that's time for a fecal sample to be tested to see whether or not they do have parasites or not. So the other thing you want to check is that their teeth are good. On some of the older ones that can't maintain body condition, make sure they have teeth. And also you'll want to age the animal at that time. You also want to make sure that there's no lamenesses present. Here's some examples of things that we commonly find when we're out testing rams. The top left shows a bumblefoot, and when this is actually infected, it's the joint up inside that gets infected. They're three-legged lame and don't want to put weight on that. If it gets bad enough and they don't get over the infection, it can actually arthrodese the joint, and then it becomes hard and more solid, and then they actually can start putting weight on it again. It doesn't always progress that way, but sometimes can. On the top right, we have a ovine contagious foot rot, and this one's paired out so you can see what damage it does cause to the hoof and how irritated it is. This is caused by a bacterium, Bacteroides nodosus, and this can be treated with antibiotics and zinc sulfate foot soaks. And then on our bottom one here, we have a foot abscess. This is also caused by a bacteria getting up in there, and that's caused by a Fusobacterium necrophorum. And if it's caught early and treated, you can sometimes get past it. It's pretty painful, and sometimes this is what turns into this up here. These are often, this foot abscess is often caused by injury to the animal when they're out on alfalfa stubble, or if they're out in the desert with ice or anything like that, and they get some type of injury there. It's really important that the ram is able to move freely and able to mount the ewes. So now moving on. Oh,
just a minute. A note on that. A lot of people confuse the foot abscess with contagious foot rot. Foot abscesses do not have an odor. Foot rot, contagious foot rot, you can diagnose that when they're coming down the alleyway. They stink so bad.
Very true.
So that's one diagnostic tool.
So now moving on into the reproductive exam. We begin with palpation of the testicles and the epididymis and the spermatic cords up to the attachments into the body. And we palpate and make sure that they're even, there's no lumps and bumps, there's no hard or soft spots, there's no swelling or edema. Sometimes you can get fluid down in the scrotal sac. Make sure there's no difference in size between the testes or the epididymis, and also we're checking for the actual firmness of them, making sure that that is also the same. If there is a significant difference in size, sometimes that can indicate atrophy or disease. And when we talk about probably one of the most common causes of infertility in males, we have to look at epididymitis, and in mature rams, that is the most common cause of infertility. Here, this is a ram's testicles that have been removed, and this ram had brucella ovis. So when we look at it, the one on the right here is a normal testicle, and then it's a really good example because you can see the head of the epididymis as it comes on down. This is the body of the epididymis, and this is the tail. And then up above here is where you have the attachments into the body. So if you look at the testicle on the left, you can see the actual testicle is smaller, and then the tail of the epididymis is huge compared to the other one. This also, being a B ovis, this is rock hard at that point. And usually this one, it can start to soften up. This is starting to atrophy. This is not going to go, whoops, sorry about that. This is not going to go away in the ram. And the sperm cells are formed in the body of the testes, and then the storage and maturation takes place in the epididymis. And once this gets blocked off, nothing gets moved through there. So that testicle is pretty much done for, and it can move into the second testicle. We take a scrotal circumference, and this is where your age of your animal is really important. As you can see, for a satisfactory ram that is a lamb, 6 to 14 months of age, you need a minimum scrotal circumference of 30 centimeters. And for an exceptional, you want a minimum scrotal circumference of 36 centimeters. With rams that are over 14 months of age, you need a minimum of a 33 scrotal circumference. And for exceptional, you want a ram with a greater than 40 centimeters. Excuse me a minute. So we have to ask, why is that so important? And there's a few different reasons. They pass on their fertility to their offspring, and a ram with a larger scrotal circumference can service more ewes in a heat cycle or in an 18-day period than something with a smaller scrotal circumference. You have increased chances of twinning with larger scrotal circumference, and the female offspring mature at an earlier age. As we move on, we're going to look at the prepuce and sheath area, and here again are some examples of some problems that we see. This one here is strictured down, so he cannot extend his penis at all, something that just looking over the fence line you're not going to see. And if you're not out there observing the ram during breeding season, you're not going to know this until all of them come up, all of your ewes come up open. These two lower pictures are pictures of pizzle rot. This is caused by a bacteria that is normal on the ram's skin. And when you have a really high protein diet, it will increase the pH of the urine, and the bacteria thrive on that. And that's what causes this ulceration and swelling. When they're swollen like this is very, very painful, and the rams do not want to mount the ewe because they associate that with the pain. And so you want to make sure that this is all cleared up prior to turning the rams in. So next oh, did you want to say something, Dr. K?
Well, back up there one time, this can spread to a vaginitis in you also. So that's another thing that might happen.
Then we're going to move on to examine the penis. And so we extend the penis, make sure everything's okay with it. We want to make sure and point this out. Here, this is the urethral process on the end of the penis, and that is normal on rams. If it is not there, it's not that big of an issue, as well as some of the older rams that are pretty aggressive, and the same thing will happen with billies. They will wear that down. The other is if you have a ram that's had a urinary calculi and the little stone got caught in that area, it may have been cut off, and so that they can urinate again. So it's not that huge of an issue if it isn't there. So here in
the one on the top?
Yeah.
Oh, you did, okay.
Yeah. And then here we have the probe that Dr. K helped develop. And we're going to go through a little bit of anatomy here, just as we explain some of the process here. This here is the rectum of the ram, and then right below that you can see the bulbourethral glands, the prostate, and the seminal vesicles. These are the accessory sex glands, and we'll talk about those in just a couple of minutes. And then once again, just to remind you, down here, this is the testicle. This is where the sperm formation actually takes place. And so this is a 14 to 16 day process at the very beginning of that cell becoming a sperm cell. And then once it is past that, it moves into the epididymis, and that's where the storage and maturation takes place. And that's a 45-day period before that sperm cell is a viable sperm cell. So these are just electrodes on the bottom here, and when we collect the sample, this is placed rectally in the ram and with those electrodes down, and so the animal will be massaged with that, and then electrical stimuli will be applied, and it's applied to these accessory sex glands. And then after 8 seconds, the electrical stimulus is removed, and you let the ram rest. And a lot of them at that point will ejaculate right away. Other ones may have to sit there for a few seconds. You wait a little bit. If they haven't ejaculated, they may have to do massage again and or the electrical stimuli. So once we get our semen sample, we take that into a lab and make slides and view it under a microscope. And if anybody's doing reproductive work as far as your vets go or anything, they need to have a phase contrast microscope, not just a cheap microscope that you can buy online. And it's really important because there's a few defects that will not show up under a regular microscope. So when we take this in and make our slides, we look at the motility, make sure that the semen cells are moving forward progressively, and then that is recorded in a % of normal motility. And at that point, you also look to see if there's any white cells in your sample. And that can indicate some disease. The other is when we mentioned extending the penis, it's really important to have that extended out to get a cleaner sample. As long as that penis is extended when you collect the sample, if there are white cells within that sample, then that means it's coming from the urinary or reproductive tract somewhere along the line. So we know that there may be an issue there with some type of infection or inflammation. If that penis is not extended when you collect the sample, you'll get a lot more of debris, some skin cells, and you can get some white cells from inside the sheath. It just kind of is dependent on the actual number of white cells for the volume of semen that you're looking at. So that's one thing you kind of want to make sure it's a clean sample. So then moving on, we look at the morphology of the cells, which is the size and shape of the cells. And I'm going to start over here. We want to show you what the normal cells should look like. And if you look at all the different cells that are here, you can see that they're very consistent size and shape. They have good smooth edges. The tails are right in the mid-central connection there, like they should be. The tails are also fairly straight here, which they should be. And I want to point out on the top of this, the head of the sperm cell is the acrosome. And this acrosome is responsible for penetration of that cell into the egg. And so if there's anything messed up on the top here, that's going to cause that to not be a viable cell. I also want to point out these kind of brighter white areas here. These are extraneous droplets, and as long as they're not attached to any cell, they're okay in a ram semen sample. When they are attached, it's a minor defect. So I'm going to move over to this picture, and we purposely put this one on because to show you how this acrosome is messed up here. This is a knobbed acrosome. It can either be a bump protruding out or one that's an indent, like such. So these right here, these sperm cells may get to the egg, but they're not going to fertilize it. This is quite common with immature rams or sexually immature rams. And then those also, when something affects the head of the cell, those are classified as a primary defect. And so that goes clear back to the point of where that cell was developed. So it goes back to that 45 to 60 day period. And so when you retest something like this to see if it's going to come out of it, you don't want to retest that ram for 60 days to make sure that he can produce regular semen again. So Here you can see that some of those droplets are actually attached to the tail, and this is a proximal droplet because it's right up next to the head of the sperm cell. That is a minor secondary defect, as well as over in our picture on the right, these tails are flipped back on themselves, unlike this one's flipped back twice. But these also are secondary defects when they're associated with the tail. And I point that out because secondary defects are happen during the maturation and storage of that cell. So that happens somewhere in the epididymis. And so that's in the last 45 days that happens. So sometimes when we see something like this, we'll ask, so was this ram sick 3 weeks ago or a month ago, even up to the last 5-6 weeks? No. Did he get into any feed? No. Was it super hot, run a fever? That type of thing is what you'll see with these. These right here also, they're called mid-piece reflexes, just for your interest. And the one thing to point out right here in this reflex, the actual droplet is caught in that reflex. So we know that that cell came out of the ram like that. There's a few environmental things that can cause some reflexed mid-pieces, but that is not retained if it's due to the environment. Not uncommon, but something that we have to be aware of. So then we're going to record all the results from everything that we've just checked. Right here we have a form that we fill out, and when we do our smaller, 1 to 5 rams per owner, we'll just use this form that is in a duplicate, so we can take off 1 copy for the owner and 1 copy for our records. And so here we're going to record the animal identification, the age of the animal, the breed, the scrotal circumference, the percent of normal motility and normal morphology, and also the body condition score. And then we're going to take that and come up with the classification that they're in. And there's 4 different classifications of rams. It's excellent, satisfactory, questionable, and unsatisfactory. And for a ram to be excellent, he needs to be excellent in every one of those categories. So say the ram is excellent in several of them, but his scrotal circumference is a 34. 34 is only satisfactory. So that ram actually is classified as a satisfactory ram. And that goes back to how many ewes he can cover in that 18-day period of time. You're not going to put as many ewes on him as you would if he were an excellent ram and had a 42 scrotal circumference. So this classification system is based on one ram impregnating 100 ewes in a heat cycle or in an 18-day period. So then we also take and record everything into a computer and have a little printout so that we group the rams for our larger producers, and we go over the results with the owner, and they're grouped so that they know if there's 1 or 2 that need to be pulled out and either cold or treated for some reason. It's easy to find those rams when you're out there and you have to run them back through the chutes. And I'll let you take it from there, Dr. K.
Well, yeah, I'd like to tell the story on this ram, that it was a stud ram that produced these rams you see here in the picture. And this ram, I loved him. But anyway, had tremendous wool quality, had a scrotal circumference of 46 centimeters, and I asked the owner how many ewes that he gave him, and he says, oh, I give him 140, and he says in 18 days he's looking for more girls. So had 95% conceived in the first estrus cycle. So that's why we emphasize the necessity of, well, the requirement for an excellent ram to have a large scrotal circumference. Next.
And just in simpler numbers, that's 133 of those ewes that were bred in that first heat cycle. And I can tell you another story. Dr. K would tell you that when he looked at the ram lambs from that sire, their semen was probably very similar to what that sire was. Very good looking semen. Another story with that, and a reason why to semen test these rams, is that can go the other way as well. We had a ram lamb that was a big purchase from one of the big sales and was winning all the big shows in its breed, and they brought it back from, really hot, humid area, and we tested that ram lamb, and we thought, well, it's pretty growthy ram. Maybe it's just a little immature yet sexually. The semen was horrible on it. And so we retested that ram in 60 days, and the semen sample maybe have changed 5%. He was still a horrible semen quality ram. So the producer really wanted to get lambs out of that ram, and so she put him with 20 ewes that year, and all the ewes came back into heat the next cycle. So she tried him through that cycle. And then she decided she better put a different ram with those ewes the next time around. So over the period of 3 years that she tried to get lambs out of this ram, and we tested him every year, he never did make it to even questionable on this semen evaluation, but we wanted rams out of that, or lambs out of that ram. And so she tried and tried. Out of 3 years, she ended up with 1 ram lamb and 2 ewe lambs. The 1 ram lamb was put through a university ram test, and when that semen came across with that breed, I was like looking at it and I'm like, I think I know who this ram belongs to. And so we checked it out, and sure enough, that gal ended up pulling the ram out of the ram test because it was horrible. It matched its sire's semen perfectly. And so that one ended up castrated and marketed as a lamb still. The 2 ewe lambs, she tried to breed for 3 years and never could. And these were, each year she got maybe 1 lamb out of him. The ewe lambs never did conceive. All right, back to you, Dr. K.
Okay, well, we did another study with a producer that had never done the breeding soundness before. They'd just run the rams through and palpated and make sure they had testicles and were not lame and other things. So we took that group of ewes and divided them into 2 groups. There was 1,400 head in each one, and we exposed group 1 to rams that had a satisfactory or excellent category in group 1, and then we just exposed the others to random selection by the ranch standards. And so it gives you an idea of what good rams can do compared to just run-of-the-mill. So you can see the increase your profits by $20 to $30 per ewe by utilizing the ram breeding soundness to select your rams and fully utilizing good rams.
We also saw that the group 1, the ones that were exposed to BSE rams, produced 17 more pounds of weaned lamb than the group 2 ewes did. Assuming
pardon?
Go ahead.
Jim.
Go ahead if you're going to talk about that last slide.
Well, no, go ahead.
Okay. Assuming a low market price of $120 per hundredweight and a high market price of $180 per hundredweight, that equates to your $20 to $30 increase in revenue per ewe. This increase in revenue was realized with a cost of only 50 cents per ewe for the ram breeding soundness evaluation. With the assumptions of the cost of the ram breeding soundness evaluation at $25 per ram and the exposure rate of 50 ewes per ram. So to figure ram costs per year, we figured this on the purchase price of $800 for one ram and a 4-year salvage or cull value of $170. The assumptions are that with 4 years, the depreciation would be $157.50 per year. The interest at 6% is $29.10 per year. The death loss at 5% is a cost of $24.25 per year, and the feed and maintenance on that one ram is $120 per year. So your ram cost per year equates to $330.85. And then we can take that and apply that ram cost on a per lamb basis. And this goes back to the utilization of your rams. So if we take 30 ewes per ram, and we're going to assume 150% lamb crop, so the number of lambs born is going to be 45. Your ram cost per lamb at $330 ram cost is $7.33, and when we add in that breeding soundness evaluation test, it's $7.89 per lamb. So if we want to utilize our ram better and turn more ewes in to him, that same one, putting 50 ewes on the ram, we have 75 lambs born at the cost of $4.73 per lamb. If we jump that up and use the satisfactory and excellence and put 85 ewes on that one ram, we're going to see 127 lambs, and that ram cost per lamb drops down to $2.80.
This was another study that we did on 202 lambs born in a 3-day period. The initial study was to find out if, the ins and outs of early weaning. And we weaned these lambs at 45 days, put them on feed, and then finished them out. So this just shows you the numbers that we had for the singles and the twins. So this gives you the pounds of lamb produced for the singles and the twins. The marketed twin, the twin bearing ewes marketed 209 pounds, where the singles 111. So that shows you why it's really important for you to have as many twins as you can. And we didn't, pardon, go ahead, Jerry.
One of the biggest questions we get asked all the time is, how much ram power should we use? I'm going to let you answer that, Dr. K.
Well, we did a study with the producer that we did the breeding soundness, had nothing but satisfactory and excellent rams, put them out to 1 ram per 85 ewes, and at 1,410 ewes, this was the figures that we got. So that shows you that you can probably extend that ram power to 1 to 100. People say, well, the country's rough. Well, figure out how you can get them to a different place if the country's rough. But I contend that they're going to, at 1 to 100, you're not going to have a lot of interference and fighting or rams to dominate what they're out there to do. So I wouldn't hesitate. I don't care what the terrain is like. If you have your rams in good shape, good strong shape, good semen quality, you can run 1 to 100.
Also, if you look at this slide, we have 50 that are non-pregnant or open. It's at 3.5%, which is a pretty low percent for especially your large range flocks. It's often over 6%. The other thing here, that 90% of those were pregnant in the first 18 days. So when we look back at those single bearing ewes and twin bearing ewes that we mentioned earlier, and they're taken off the forest and sold to the feedlot, the singles averaged a weaning weight of 113 pounds. The averaged combined weight of the twins were 209 pounds. We're going to take that and show how it affects your bottom dollar. So your 50 open ewes out of that group, the income from the lambs is 0, and 310 singles at 113 pounds equivalates to 35,030 pounds of lamb that you're marketing. We're using last Friday's price of $1.60, and that is $56,048. The 1,050 with twins at 209 pounds equivalent to 219,450 pounds of lamb marketed. At that same $1.60, it's $351,120. So once again, your open used grossed 0 per head, and your single bearing ewes grossed $180.80 per head. Your twin bearing ewes grossed $334.40 per head. We want to point that out because that's quite a bit of difference there.
So what we want to do, we'll go down through the list of things. Select rams with excellent semen quality and large scrotal circumference. Select healthy rams. Make sure everything is healthy about them. They're good and stout. Body condition of 3 and 4, and no defects. And select for genetic superiority. If it's wool, if it's meat, well, pick out your genetic superiority. And make sure that they're B. ovis negative and ovine progressive pneumonia negative. And you can have them tested for scrapie resistant. Use only the RR or QR rams. And do not mix older rams with ram lambs. It's a disaster. And take care of your rams. They will take care of you. Now, results at pace: an increased lamb crop with flocks tested rams. Economic advantage of $20 to $30 per ewe. Reduced expenditure on additional ram power. Shorter lambing period. I think this is really important. More lambs born in early in the lambing season. And the increased size and uniformity of the lamb crop. And this is just some of the trivia, but I worked in Estonia some years back when when they were under the communist regime. They removed all sheep from Estonia, moved them out of the country. The stock producers there, when they got their independence, was back to building their stock, and this is an example of a single sire system, and Jerry mentioned that earlier. But they bought this high-powered ram from Denmark and didn't get any no use conceived. So it was a good educational program for all of those producers that without a ram breeding soundness evaluation, a single sire system is a total disaster.
And this doesn't just happen halfway across the world. It happens all over. We see it in the United States, across the entire United States, and regardless of the size of the ram flocks. So RBSE should be a good educational experience for the owner all the way around, including your questions being answered by your veterinarian, and also not just being told that the ram is good or bad, make sure you have more information. Make sure you know what the scrotal circumference is on him. Make sure you know the details of it all. Guess where that ram ended up from that was tested in Estonia?
Yeah. Back to Denmark. And then 2 years ago, Jerry and I went to Mongolia to train their veterinarians in Mongolia on breeding soundness evaluation. And the little microscope that you see there was built here in Fort Collins as an LED light source that is powered by a solar collector. And we examined ram semen 90 miles from out on the Gobi Desert, 90 miles from the closest electricity. So you can do microscopic work any place where the sun shines.
So that's the end of our presentation. We want to thank you for attending, and we're happy to entertain any questions at this point.
Okay, thank you guys for that presentation and all the information you went through. We've had several questions come in, so I'll launch right into those. Those of you that do have a microphone attached and want to ask your question live, there should be a hand in the upper part, in the tab on the left side of the upper part of your control panel, and if you click that hand, I'll see that you have your hand raised and I can call on you. Otherwise, feel free to just keep typing your questions into the question box, and I'll try to get to as many of them as I can in the time that we have available. So we had a question come in when you had the screen of the hooves up there. Just a simple question: have you ever tried niacin supplementation to strengthen hooves on rams ahead of breeding season?
Simple answer is no.
Okay. And then go to the scrotal circumference screen, Jerry, the one you just went past. That one right there. We had several questions come in on this. Does it matter on breed for testicle size on rams?
No.
I would say the only thing that we've seen different would be on a Navajo churro and also on a couple of the mini breeds that are not your standard rams. But as far as Rambouillet, Suffolk, Hampshire, all those standard breeds, there's not.
Okay, and while we're on this, somebody asked about the size for younger rams that are younger than 6 months of age in particular, because a lot of these rams that are being sold at sales aren't very old. So different sizes for those, and how long does it take to mature to complete size, that kind of answer.
Do you want to stab at that, Dr. K,
Well,
or do you want me to?
If we can both do that. But if they're 6 months, less than 6 months, there's no need to even try to collect a semen sample on them. And their scrotal circumference, less than 6 months, that's a guess. You don't know what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, once you get under a 29 centimeter, the semen has pretty much always looked bad on anything we've looked at that's been 29 or below. So that portion's not worth it. The other thing is when you get some of the larger structured framed rams, and I'll use like a Columbia in particular, some of those put a little bit more into their structural growth rather than their sexual reproductive maturity. And so they might mature just a little bit later sexually. So it's not really a fair deal when the rams are under 6 months of age to even look at what their scrotal circumference or anything is, because it's can be all over the board and it can change quite a bit. The other is if you have a single ram who's been fed really heavy, his scrotal circumference is probably going to be larger than something that's a twin, which is more desirable. But because of the slower growth early on, it's not a fair comparison under that 6 months of age.
Okay, we've got a couple of different lines of question that came in around that. Several people have asked about the comment about keeping mature rams separate from lamb rams, and the comment about that being a disaster, and why. Why is that a disaster, and what to look for, and what
Well,
to
one
do.
thing,
Go ahead, Cleon.
the older rams, yeah, the older rams will beat up on those little guys, on the younger ones big time. So it's just not fair to those younger rams to put them in with a bunch of older mature rams. It's injuries to what you're looking at.
You can also run into a little bit of disease transmission if you are bringing a couple of ram lambs in and you already have some mature rams, or if you think that they need to have a sexual education, they don't need that. You're going to pass more disease between the mature ones, especially if they haven't been semen tested and Bovis tested, and you have something like that, and you bring a naive ram lamb into that situation, the one you've spent all the money on that year, he may be the one that comes up positive pretty quickly.
Okay, and somebody's asking questions about the time to test them. Is there any reason that a ram offered for sale in mid-September should not be able to pass a BSE prior to sale? We've been led to believe that it's too early in the season to utilize semen evaluation. True or false?
I say false. He should be tested.
I
Any
agree.
comment?
Okay.
Well, it depends on where you're coming from. If you're out of the Midwest where you got a lot of high temperatures and a lot of humidity, then probably you're going to have some decrease in semen quality. But that depends on the temperature and what I call traileriasis. You go to Sedalia, Missouri, and you buy a ram out of Sedalia that's been transported from the Midwest someplace into that sale, and then you haul him to Oregon and then wonder why it's not getting anything settled. And it's a matter of temperature and humidity. So if you're in an area where you have a lot of high temperature, high humidity, why that's going to affect semen quality. So in cases like that, I'd say that, maybe it's best to wait until September because you might get a false reading. So in our area where we have a lot cooler weather, why it's not a problem. But the stress factors that affect semen quality, a trailer is the worst thing in the world as far as stress is concerned. When you load them up, say Sedalia, Missouri, and pull them to someplace in Oregon, why don't expect that ram to be worth a nickel until that whole thing regenerates. Like Jerry showed out there, the time that it takes to form that cell, the maturation of it, whatnot. So this is where you're running into problems.
Okay, along those lines, somebody asked about how long do rams stay fertile, and they didn't say anything else, but I'm going to interpret that as you got a good ram test. How long does it take them to go bad? Can it happen as quick as putting them on a trailer and traveling 600 miles, or?
Yeah, it can, but they'll recover from that. But it'll take 6 weeks to recover.
Okay.
One or the other is if there's a dramatic change in the feed, that also can affect that pretty quickly. If they end up getting a disease and run a high fever, that can affect the semen as well pretty quickly.
Okay, and somebody asked about the feed and mineral in particular. How much does that affect a ram's ability to breed?
Well, if they do moderation in their feed, and I don't think it has any effect. I think they're good, but if you go to loading them up on a lot of carbohydrates, why, it's going to ruin it. And we had an example of that some years ago, a Rambouillet breeder that before the sale, when a month before the sale, he started putting them on 2 pounds of corn a day out on the pasture too. And we had a hard time finding a ram in there that we'd call satisfactory. And it's just from that hot feed.
Okay.
So.
All right. Let's see. There's a question on where'd that go here? Sorry, I lost it. I had it pulled up here. Oh, on the slides where the economics were, those were Western white-faced ewes. Was there any particular breed there?
Those are primarily what they call a Western range ewe. They probably got some of them have Targhee, Columbia, Rambouillet. That's the main ones.
A few of those out of Wyoming probably had some Warhill, which is a combination of several of those breeds.
Okay. For those that are AI, and somebody asked about a semen extender, any comment on that? I can read it to you here. It says, oh, shoot, sorry, I'm losing my place. Yes, trilateral, is that the right word? You guys got any experience with that? Comments? It's okay if it's outside of the scope. Okay, I'll skip over that one.
No, there's a ready-made one that people are using in the club lamb world that seems to work pretty well to fresh extend the semen and ship it as long as it's overnighted and used the next day. They seem to get along with it pretty well.
Okay. Let's see.
One comment I could make about the feed and the effect of it, every once in a while you run across those really easy keeper rams who you can't feed him a pound of corn a day or he turns into a 5 body condition score really quickly. You can run into 2 problems with that, and one of them is that some of those are really prone to pizzle rot, and some rams seem to be a little bit more prone to it than others and will get it every year. And the other comment I would make about a really heavy body condition score on a ram, if you can see that when they walk, the fat jiggles across their back of their shoulders and back, there's a lot more fat in other places, and that will start to settle down in the scrotum, and that increases the heat in the scrotum, which will decrease the size of the testicles a little bit if they're really fat, and also it just kills the semen. It wrecks it.
Okay, along those lines, in terms of semen quality, you guys talked about some of the seasonal stuff, but questions are coming in. Does semen quality vary with the season? So different times a year that you expect certain things to happen or not happen?
I would say,
I think
go ahead.
It varies with the season. They're just the same as a ewe that cycles. So you've got a low period, and then as fall comes on and you get your melatonin and whatnot to go on, why the testicles start to firm up. They're, in the off season, they're soft, and they'll begin to start to firm up as come near the natural breeding season.
And a little bit of that also plays back to your housing and what facilities they are. If you're testing range rams in, say, middle of August, those same rams in Wyoming, Colorado, Utah would be probably 1 to 3 centimeters larger in September and October than they are in August. And we do note that. The other thing is that a lot of people when they're doing the out of season breeding, which is more common probably in hoop barns and a little bit further east. Some of the club lamb show stock is bred a little bit earlier, trying to get the earlier lambs. And a lot of people keep those inside with fans on them to keep them cool. And the really fertile rams are pretty good this time of year. I've been testing some small little groups this past month like that. And the ones that are not as fertile, they're the ones that don't have good semen now. And it might get a little bit better in, say, September. There's a few, these have been crossbred, that even September, the semen didn't look good. The scrotum and testes felt good, but semen didn't really look really good. He would be a questionable. He'd breed about half of the ewes he was turned in with. Come November, when they were doing their late breeding, that ram was at the top of their list, and he was just more affected by the seasonality than others. So there's a little bit on individualism there.
How many days prior to turnout should we test our rams?
The closer to when you're going to use them, the more, I don't want to say accurate, but the better picture you're going to get, because it's kind of like a picture in time. So if you end up having to test him, say 2 weeks before you want to use him, that's still a pretty good window. If for some reason you're testing them 2 months before, and this probably plays more into the range groups just because of when you can get there and test them. If something comes through them, the good thing is you have a backup if something had gone through disease-wise or heat stress on them. You can go back in and you can retest a lot of those. Where if you test them 2 weeks before, you're scrambling to get rams. So that, with some of the bigger producers, plays into it, that they have to end up testing a bit earlier, and when the ram sales are, they want to test prior to that, which may be 2 months before they're actually going to use their rams. I don't know if that answered the question or not, but
yeah, I think it gets at it. Well, this is too technical for me, but I'll read it. Does growing ram lambs together without ewes increase seminal vesicle infections because they sodomize each other? That's a question for you, Cleon.
Well, we have some trouble with ram lambs in groups, all right, that they spread what we call a lamb epididymitis. So this can go through a bunch of ram lambs that are on good feed. So,
call from Ken C.
Okay. So you guys hit hard on the scrotal circumference because we're still getting a lot of questions on that. Do you use these same scrotal circumference standards for hair sheep breeds? Is there any big difference there to consider?
I use the same ones. I can't say that I've noticed anything majorly different on them, on the ones we've tested.
Okay, and a tape for scrotal measurement. Does it have to be designed for that as the one that you had pictured, or can a just regular old sewing tape, measuring tape, be used?
Go ahead.
I'd say you're going to get a more accurate reading on one that's designed for measuring scrotal circumference. I don't know, but my hands wouldn't work on a sewing machine type tape measure. But you could do the same thing. That's not saying you can't.
the biggest thing is consistency. If you're measuring the same guy several times, or if you're measuring a group of 5 of them and comparing them out.
Okay, somebody said, what about giving LA200 as an antibiotic before breeding due to the ram being stressed? Advise against or for? Any comments?
Well, I'd stay away from all antibiotics prior to, unless you were dealing with some infectious process. But just as a preventive, I wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, how do you put a ram on a diet if they are too fat? Advice on handling too fat of a ram.
Cut back on the carbohydrates.
Okay, we had somebody that wants you to expound a little bit more on some identifiers of a good libido before we turn the ram in with the ewes, since the libido is pretty tough to quantify. What should they be looking for to know that that ram is ready to go?
Well, you could put rams next to a group of ewes and put that ram, fence next to the ewes and see if he's really interested in ewes that are coming in to eat.
Okay.
Now,
go ahead.
The sheep experimental station has done a lot of work on that, and they will actually have some ewes in heat and see what a ram, how many times it services a ewe. They've done some work on that at Du Bois up at the sheep experimental station.
Okay. So does timing of shearing affect semen quality at all? Is there anything to be concerned with testing rams around shearing time?
Well, I'd say that the only thing that would make a difference is the season of the year and how much stress you're putting on it. If there's not a whole lot of stress and it's still cool weather, why, I'd say that it doesn't affect it.
Okay, and you mentioned white blood cells in the ejaculate or in the semen sample. Could you expand on that a little bit? Specifically, the question is, what antibiotic is best if you find white blood cells in an ejaculate?
Well, that you need to figure out what's causing it. And if it's a ram lamb, I'd say probably the LA200 or one of those would clean up some of those, what we call lamb epididymitis. It's a different organism. But for the B. ovis, if they got B. ovis, the antibiotics not going to help it any.
And another note on that B. ovis, it'd be worth, if you had white blood cells and it's a mature ram, it'd be worth testing him for B. ovis. Just palpation, when they go back to the study of the way the ranches used to do it, and they just palpate, and anything that had bad testicles they'd kick out. There's about 20% of infected in a B. ovis infected herd that you're going to miss just by palpation alone. So you're just continuing on the disease without the testing.
Okay, thanks. And one final question. Go ahead, Cleon.
With saying using antibiotics, we've done some studies that you can have a ram with Brucella ovis, and you can just flood him with LA200 for 30 days. Brucella ovis just maintains itself. You can't get rid of it. The only way that the only antibiotic that works on ram epididymitis is called trailer mycin.
For those of you who are wondering, that's hauling it off, right?
put it in the trailer and haul it out of there, get it out of there.
Yeah. Okay.
That works in a lot of conditions.
Yeah. Okay. So we had one other question that come in that I wanted to get to. Somebody asked a question about freezing ram semen. Does ram semen freeze well?
That's completely out of my category.
Okay.
I have no comment.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, on the ram freezing, you lose like 20% of the quality of the semen when you freeze it, and you lose 20% of it when it is thawed out. That's why the fresh extended is working so much better on sheep as far as the AI goes.
Okay, good. Is it, well, I lied. There's one other good question that came in. Is it bad for a ram to only service a few ewes rather than a large number? Does that affect his fertility in any way?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Very good. Okay, well, I think we'll go ahead and shut her down. We're at quarter after here. I want to thank Jerry and Cleon for their talk, and for all the listeners that were joining us tonight and asked all the good questions and everything. And thanks again to the American Sheep Industry for providing funding for the webinar and the Let's Grow program. And we'll be back on the air next month with another webinar on lamb seasonality. And we look forward to you joining us then. Thank you, everybody, and everybody have a good evening.